Today on the Lydia McGrew channel, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. It's not going to be New Testament studies. It's not going to be probability as applied to the resurrection, but it is going to be evidentialism in apologetics. I've talked about this over the years, what evidentialism isn't, and so forth. And a few weeks ago, I had an exchange on social media with someone who was dubious about what he considered to be my exaggerated or over-the-top evidentialism in the area of apologetics. And it was I think, a pretty cordial exchange, but we disagreed. And at one point, he made a comment that was surprising to me. And it was to the effect that if I were in contact with someone who was having doubts about his faith, it would seem that my rampaging evidentialism, as I sometimes call it, would require me to refrain from advising that person to pray. So the idea was that if someone were already a Christian, he's having doubts about his faith, I'm in contact with that person, that to be consistent with my own rampaging evidentialism, I should not advise him to pray about his doubts because, so went the reasoning, if I advised him to pray, I would somehow be betraying my evidentialism by suggesting that this person accessed something that was not perfectly rational in some way, or that he tried to work upon himself in some non-rational fashion. And I found that a surprising accusation, and I disagree with that. I don't think that's required by my evidentialism, however rampaging it is. And so I got thinking about some of the things that this person and I were discussing, and a list of them would be the sacraments, so, taking the Lord's Supper, prayer, fellowship with other Christians, Christian music, that kind of thing, okay? All these things that are not in and of themselves rational arguments, okay? Going to church, being a member of a church, and so forth. And so the question is then, for a rampaging evidentialist, what is the point of all of these things? I've shortened that up in my title. I haven't got the wording exact until I actually post this, but it's going to be something like, what's the point of church? Or if you're an evidentialist, what's the point of church? And that's shorthand, for all of these other things. So is it true that if you're an evidentialist, a strong evidentialist, you think that we need to have good reasons for what we believe in the religious realm, then you have to downplay these things, poo-poo these things, they're not really that important, and so forth? And I would say no. And so I want to answer that question. For the rampaging evidentialist, what's the point of church, sacraments, prayer, fellowship, music, etc., for someone who is a Christian? All right. So I'm going to start out with a set of things that are going to cause the anti-evidentialist to say, yeah, we want to get past that. That's not what we were talking about. That's still too intellectual. But I want to put them on the table because they are part of the answer to the question. So to begin with, there are what you might call the intellectual benefits of being involved with a good church. Okay. And I don't want to pass these over because they just are there. So one is that a good church should be presenting good reasons to its members. And if there are good reasons in a person's mind, that's a great evidentialist function of church, right? But also sheer Bible knowledge. I don't think we should be assuming that, everybody knows everything that's important, that's in the Bible. Also knowledge of things like cults and so forth. Some years ago, I was in a women's Bible study, and we were talking, and at a certain point, the phrase Jehovah's Witnesses came up. One of the ladies, she'd been in this Bible study for years, and I think she was a member of that church, I'm not sure. But it came out that she didn't know anything about the Jehovah's Witnesses and assumed that they were just another denomination of Christians. Okay, so she didn't know, like, that they deny that Jesus is God, for example. That it just was knowledge that she was lacking. So let's start with the fact that one of the points of being a member of a good church is to gain knowledge that you would not otherwise have. I mean, that should be something that's going on in church and in discipleship and so forth. But I hear you out there, if you're thinking that there's a problem with rampaging evidentialism, saying, yeah, fine, but what else? Is that all? Yes, that is not all. No, that is not all. Okay. Secondly, and very, very crucially, there are non-rational forces arrayed against Christianity. There's social pressure, there's discouragement, there's physical suffering and pain, there's depression, there's conflict with, let's say, unbelieving family members, etc., right? Worry about one's job. Let's say that your employer is putting pressure on you on some matter that is a matter of conscience for you as a Christian, okay? There's the sheer feeling of loneliness and isolation. Everybody else thinks this, that's what we hear in our minds. And I believe there are also real fallen angels, like real literal demons, a real literal devil who are trying to use these things, okay? Yes, the Screwtape Letters is a, semi-fictional, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were some literal things there that are true. Try to get your patient to feel that, he's all alone, that everybody disagrees with him, that God does not love him, and so forth. I was posting recently on Facebook about what's sometimes called scripting, which is that, thing that goes through your mind, right? Like, yeah, nobody loves you, or God doesn't love you, or God doesn't care about you, etc. None of that is some kind of, rational argument that you're automatically immune to, if you just have all the right evidentialist reasons. And I can speak from experience there, living with chronic pain. Okay, so there are all of these non-rational forces engaged against someone who is a Christian believer, no matter how intellectually well-grounded he might be. Now, all of these other things that I've been listing that I'm talking about here are meant to help you. So you set these things against those forces arrayed against us. You are encouraged by your fellow believers. You, I believe, receive actual metaphysical, spiritual strength from partaking of the Lord's Supper. Other people have different views of the Lord's Supper, but at least, even a memorialist would say you're reminded of the Lord's death. You're given the opportunity to meditate upon it and be thankful for it and realize that he loves you because he gave himself for you. Prayer brings us, I believe, actual spiritual strength, okay? But it's also an opportunity to reflect on the truths of God. All of these things, music, Christian music, incredibly encouraging. So since the things that we're facing are not just rational arguments, and since we as human beings are physical and emotional, psychological beings as well, we're not just intellectual beings, we need these other kinds of feeding and help and encouragement and strengthening in our spiritual life. And you might say, yeah, that's obvious, it goes without saying. But I would dare anyone to find anything non-evidentialist in what I've just said. Think about it. Why would you think that anything that I've just said is opposed to a rampaging evidentialism that says we should believe proportionate to the strength of the evidence? So, I was asked, if you were in contact with someone who was doubting your faith, wouldn't you feel strange about telling him to pray? Well, no, not at all. Because I believe the evidence is on the side of Christianity. Now, of course, I'm also going to try to answer his doubts or point him to an organization like Talk About Doubts, or to someone who I trust who can help him to grapple with the intellectual side of his doubts. That's going to be a multifaceted approach, as indeed it should be. You don't suggest that he pray in isolation. You don't say, yeah, just try to pray your doubts away. Okay, that would be contrary to evidentialism. I would say it's also contrary to good pastoral practice. If you're a pastor and somebody comes to you with intellectual questions, don't just tell him to go try to pray the doubts away. It's not a good idea. I want to emphasize here that suggesting that someone pray who's a Christian, who's doubting, is not to be confused with suggesting that he try to gin up feelings against reason. If I tell somebody to pray, I'm not just saying, go out and say this mantra to try to, and then you won't worry anymore about these questions that you have. Okay? That's why prayer is not transcendental meditation. It's actually talking to a person. And one of the things to ask God for is clarity of mind, clarity of thought, and not to be merely borne down by the burden and the heat of the day and the horror of something you've recently learned or that has happened to you or that you're going through or that a loved one is going through. You're praying to a person for help. You're asking a person for help. You're not just going out there and doing mind tricks on yourself. And so if I suggest that somebody pray, that's I'm not suggesting that he go out there and try to do little mental tricks. Digression. I moved to a digression here. When someone had died, I'm going to try to be a little imprecise here. This was many years ago. This is not a recent event, but someone who was very close to me had someone who was close to him who died, okay, and was grieving that death. A secular friend said to the grieving man, why don't you try writing a letter to your dead friend? That may help you. Now, I have no doubt that the person who gave him that advice, he meant well, he was trying to help, but I'm sure he didn't actually believe that the dead friend was going to read the letter, right? It was entirely a self-help exercise. And I very strongly advise that we not blur the line between prayer and self-help exercises, okay? That when you speak to God, that's not like, some therapist saying, oh, you're sad about somebody who died. Why don't you try writing a letter to him? That might make you feel better. Where the therapist, of course, doesn't believe that that's actually a form of communication with your dead friend. But prayer is a natural form of communication with God. But its purpose is not to psych ourselves. It's against reason. Like, okay, I don't have any good reasons for believing this, or I don't have enough good reasons, but I'm just gonna pray harder. That would be anti-evidential, but there's no reason why that has to be the only way or even the right way to advise someone to pray. You pray for help, you pray for encouragement, you pray for peace, and so forth. You also pray for clarity in evaluating the truth and knowing the truth. Pray out of a desire to know the truth. All right. Last point. All of the things I've been saying all the way along here concern a fallen world. We live in a fallen world. We live in a world of pain and sin and temptation and death and conflict and so forth. All of that sadness and that badness. A world of evil and evil people who are trying to bring down what is good, but also natural evil and suffering and so forth. In eternity, as I believe as a Christian, which I believe I can defend evidentially, we shall know as we are known, and we shall be freed from the presence of sin. So when we're with the Lord, okay, we're not going to be suffering physically anymore. We're not going to be suffering mentally anymore. We're not going to be subject to that bombardment all the time. You know, you're wrong, you're stupid, Christianity's bad, God doesn't love you, and so forth. Come on, don't you just want to do this thing, you know, temptation and so forth. It's all going to be gone. And then and there, we will be enjoying fellowship with God and with others, of which these things we're talking about here are a foretaste. Okay, the sacraments, prayer, going to church, fellowship, music, mutual encouragement, and all of that, okay, they have a point even beyond the help that they give to us in this life to believe in accordance with what the evidence God has given us really shows, which is that he loves us, he's sent his son to die for us, and so forth. But they're also giving us a little glimpse of what we're going to be enjoying forever. So do they have a point? My goodness, these are just beginning to show us those very things that we look forward to, that we hope for, and that we long for, and that we'll be experiencing throughout eternity in the beatific vision and fellowship with others who are also fully united with God in eternity. So for sure, there's a point. There's a great point. And the best church meetings have that. The best, dare I say it, Christian music concerts have that sense of a foretaste of heaven. This video has been a little more addressed to my fellow Christians. If you do have doubts about Christianity, please plunge yourself into the evidence, which by, the blessing of natural events, even the existence of the internet and so forth, you have a wonderful opportunity to know. And again, I want to advocate the ministry of Talk About Doubts in this respect. But at the same time, don't think that any of us, even us rampaging evidentialists, are urging you to say, okay, I'm going to put my relationship with God on hold. I'm going to try to go at this in an entirely, cerebral way because that's the only thing. Frankly, if you try to do that, you're probably not going to do that, and you may very well be succumbing to irrational and irrational sources of doubt and discouragement just when you thought you were sort of clearing the decks to be completely some kind of purely cerebral being. Nobody needs to do that or should do that. It's not wise, and it's not required by a commitment to evidence and truth. So I wanted to say that today, and I'll try to put some relevant links into the show notes as well. Please come back next time to the Lydia Migru channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.